Festival of the Lost is in full swing, and in today's video we have part 3 from the Tales of the Forgotten lore book. In part 1 and 2 we talked about the drowned captain and also the Legion lost, and today we talk about the findings of Eido on these Headless Ones, the truth according to her. This tale gets pretty interesting and it wraps up the story of this year's event. If you'd like to see those other 2 videos, the links are below. Would you like some tea? The trip to Luna had been a short one, but now Eido sat uncomfortably in a folding chair in Eris Morn's dwelling. Her host poured steaming liquid from a vessel into a small ceramic cup. The scribe took it politely, trying to keep the contents from spilling over the rim. "So you believe the Headless Ones are connected to this hall-between?" Eris said. "Yes," Eido answered. "I do not believe they are of Hive origin." "I see. Oh, you do? I was wondering." Eido trailed off under Eris's stare. The scribe looked down at her tea. Humans tended to drink such things communally, but Eris had not poured a cup for herself. Letting her eyes wander, Eido realized the room was oddly bare, but for the teapot and a laddered mat at the door's threshold. The lettering on it was illegible. There was a long silence. "I was asked to make this place more hospitable," Eris said. Eido wasn't sure if this was an explanation or an apology. "During that time, children would run amok," Cryptarch Matsuo explained. "They would extort foodstuffs from the citizenry under the threat of vandalism, hence the participants' eagerness to disguise their identities," Eido mused. "But how does this spirit of lawlessness relate to communion with the dead?" she continued, puzzled. Matsuo shrugged. "Maybe the hall-between was a celebration of transgression in general, a period when people disguised themselves to act out of character. When docile hatchlings acted as bandits," Eido supplied, "and the dead returned to speak with the living." "Exactly," the Cryptarch nodded, "and those without heads were granted replacements, for a time." "I believe you're due for congratulations," Eido continued. "And several apologies. Your work revealing the Headless Ones was a feat of rare scholarship." "Well, thank you for saying so," Glint chirped. He seemed to double in size as his shell swelled with pride. "When I started my investigation, everyone laughed at me. But who's laughing now?" I'm not sure," Eido admitted. "Is it Drifter? He sometimes snickers at my expense." "No," Glint explained patiently. "It's me. I'm the one who's laughing." "Oh," Eido exclaimed. "You're laughing as an expression of vindication. I understand." "Yep, I'm the only paranormal expert in the tower who's also a ghost," Glint preened. "Fascinating," Eido agreed. "However, I do have a few questions about your conclusions." The findings of Eido, scribe of House Light, regarding the beings known as the Headless Ones, continued. "From which I conclude that the pumpkin was some type of sentient gourd that contained eyes and a mouth, sometimes a single eye, and sometimes the less unsettling 4 eyes. Whether these gourds were killed, cooked, and eaten is a point of debate. Perhaps after a time they were angered at being hunted for food and eventually turned on their predators. But then, if I am reading this pre-Golden Age primary source correctly, certain religious festivals were devoted to rearing the heaviest pumpkin. Perhaps these pumpkins were instead used as guides to traverse the hall-between, though I still do not understand how a gourd could attain locomotion." After seeing Glint's evidence, I combed our archives for any mentions of headless bodies, Cryptarch Matsuo began, and I uncovered what I consider to be the oldest known documentation of the Headless Ones. He slid a vacuum-sealed piece of parchment across the desktop to Eido, who chittered in anticipation. "As you can see," Matsuo continued with a self-satisfied smirk, "this report was written by a Golden Age scholar who describes himself a 4th grade researcher. He calls this document a book report," Eido noticed. "There must have been a larger body of inquiry to the subject than we ever imagined." "Absolutely," Matsuo affirmed. "And this report identifies the individual who I believe discovered the very first Headless One. A scientist named Ichabod Crane," Eido exclaimed with delight. So, if the Headless Ones were created by Nokris as you claim, Eido continued, how could they come to populate a cavern on Earth? Maybe some Headless Ones hitched a ride from the moon, Glint posited, like stowaways of cosmic evil. Perhaps, Eido replied, unconvinced, or perhaps they are not of Hive origin after all. We may not have enough data yet to draw any conclusions. But one thing we can clarify right now, she continued, is why the Headless Ones are so poorly named. Obviously, they have heads. Glint's digital iris narrowed. He vibrated in a low whir, which Eido misinterpreted as thoughtful consideration. The findings of Eido, scribe of House Light, regarding the beings known as Headless Ones, continued. Here's what we know about the strange pre-Golden Age ritual of the Hall Between. Common humans wore monstrous masks for cosmetic and spiritual purposes, a custom that survives via Festival of the Lost. Masked humans were allowed, if not encouraged, to participate in banditry and extortion of their neighbors. This seemed especially prevalent among juveniles. Humans used a long-extinct variety of pumpkin familiars to breach the veil between life and death. It's unclear what role these sentient fruits played in the ritual, but the psycho-spiritual power of the legendary gourds merits further research. If pre-Golden Age humans knew of the Headless Ones, Eido said, then they cannot be of Hive origin. A reasonable deduction, Cryptarch Matsuo affirmed. Humanity's first contact with the Hive didn't occur until sometime during the collapse. Glint will be disappointed by this conclusion, Eido said reluctantly. I suspect so, Matsuo replied. Speaking of Glint, if you could omit my contribution to your research, I would appreciate it. He tapped his forefingers together carefully. I was rather dismissive of Glint's early expeditions, and I have no desire to eat crow now. None of us desired that. Eido chittered aghast. I suspect he would taste bitter. You really think that humans created the Headless Ones? Glint tilted his shell flaps obstinately. Yes, I hypothesize that these were created as part of an ancient human ritual, Eido replied, oblivious to the ghost's indignation, called the Hall Between. Glint tilted incredulously. A hall between what? The realms of the living and dead, Eido reasoned, to which the ancient pumpkins were key. Glint's shell flaps were slack in confusion. So, while I appreciate your discovery of the Headless Ones, Eido continued, I cannot support your conclusions regarding their origins, or their clearly inaccurate names, Eido added. But I like, Glint sputtered. I must reiterate that they do, in fact, have heads, Eido insisted in exasperation. It's their defining feature. The findings of Eido, scribe of House Light, regarding the beings known as Headless Ones, continued. It seems the overarching theme of the Hall Between was transgression. It was a time when social strictures were lifted and humans were permitted to cross the boundaries of nature and society. It appears that most humans use this license to contact their ancestors, similar to the Vanguard severance rituals aboard the Leviathan. However, it is entirely possible that more adventurous practitioners use the power of the pumpkins to create entirely new beings, the Headless Ones. I'm grateful for Glint for conclusively proving the existence of these reclusive creatures. However, my subsequent research with the Guardian leads me to challenge his conclusions regarding their origins. This debate is likely to continue as long as Lightbearers retain their ghoulish taste for the Headless Ones' loot and their visceral candy innards. Anyway, Guardians, that's all we got for this year's Festival of the Lost stories. As I mentioned, the first two parts can be found in the description below, and all these spooky stories and tales that have been twisted over the years in Destiny's universe is really cool to see from the different perspectives. Glint thought they were resurrected by Nokris last year, and Eido concludes something totally different. But if you like to see some other Destiny lore and mysteries just like these videos, please be sure to subscribe to the channel. Anyway, I thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next video.